Hello and welcome! I'm DDF Racer and today I'm going to be talking about the most recent upgrade to my PC, my brand new NVIDIA RTX 3080 graphics card. For a little context, I've been running a 1080 for the past 4 and a bit years. It's been responsible for every video I've made on the channel, every live stream I've ever done, so it was definitely time for an upgrade. And I'm just going to come out of the box and say this straight away. It's just not worth it. I mean, that's not to say it isn't an absolutely amazing graphics card. It is. I mean, I've been looking forward to this moment for years to get a new GPU. It really is a momentous occasion. And now I can finally turn the settings up on nearly everything to pretty much max. All of the sim racing titles you're used to seeing on the channel now look so much more detailed. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on in the video and show you the footage, of course. Everything looks much crisper as well thanks to the increased super sampling, and runs much smoother too, especially in VR. It's a whole other biscuit. It's like I'm being immersed in the whole experience as a newcomer all over again, and for you guys watching, you won't be able to resort to counting my pixels in the middle of a boring race from now on. Sure, it's amazing and everything looks beautiful and everything runs so smoothly now, but for what it cost, it just doesn't stack up. You see, I wasn't planning on upgrading my old 1080 anytime soon, but a few weeks ago, it started glitching out and putting artifacts on the screen. You know, the kind of glitching that tells you your hardware's about to die. I started seeing things on the screen such as warping polygons and flickering red and green lights, which would get worse and then eventually lead to the software crashing after a few minutes. Underclocking the GPU helped out as a temporary relief, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it gave out completely, so yeah, upgrade time! And my logic kind of went like this. Why get an average card which would be cheaper, but ultimately become obsolete in a year or two, when instead I could spend a little bit of extra money, get something top of the range, which might last me for another 5 years or so, just like my old 1080 did. If I'm gonna have to spend some money anyway, especially in terms of just being able to keep the channel running with the graphics card, I might as well make it future-proof, you know? Well, yeah, but as you probably already know too well, it turns out the graphics cards are just ridiculously overpriced at the moment, if you can even get your hands on one in the first place. Maybe if the prices weren't massively blown out, a 3080 could be a worthwhile investment. Maybe things will go back to normal in a few years, but right now, in my opinion, it's just not worth it. Only people who are desperate or have the cash to burn are in the market for a top-tier GPU right now, and I would definitely consider myself to be in the former of those categories, not the latter. I probably would have stuck with my old 1080 for many more years if I could have, if only just to avoid the next few months of eating nothing but baked beans and instant noodles. Sure, the card might have struggled to keep up with newer titles, and it wouldn't have looked super pretty, but it would have done just fine, you know? With it failing on me all of a sudden, I couldn't not buy a new card, so here I am, 3080 and all. And with that in mind, now that I've got that disclaimer out of the way, I think it's only fair that we take a look at how awesome this thing is. Now unfortunately, I don't have any unboxing or installation footage. When it arrived, I was kind of up against it to get my RaceRoom June update video out in time for when the update would actually drop. Link to that video on top of the screen. And I literally just didn't have the time to take a step to the side and start putting this video together at the same time as well, so sorry about that. Something that became quite obvious rather quickly, however, was I didn't take into account the fact that the 3080 was physically a little bit bigger than the 1080. So I had to start repositioning hard drives inside my PC case and making some modifications to the internal frame itself. All good though. After a mini panic, everything fit just fine, connected up just fine, drivers installed just fine as well, and switched on first time, no issues. I was a little bit concerned about my PSU though, with it being on the lower end of the specifications. It's only at 700 watts, so it should be fine, but I am well aware that any sudden power spikes could tip it over the edge and just shut the whole PC down. So I also ordered a new 850 watt Platinum PSU, which is here. I just need to get around to fitting it. But yeah, the swapping over process between the old 1080 and the new 3080 couldn't have been easier really, and there's not really a noticeable increase in the ambient room temperature or the fan noise with the new card, which is nice. But there's a massive improvement under the hood. Something worth pointing out is that 99% of the time, I'm a VR sim racer, and VR means fixed frame rates. An easy way of comparing performance between the old and the new card would have been looking at the frame rate increase, but in my Oculus CV1 I physically can't go above 90 frames. That's just the limit of the headset. However, the detail that I can cram into that 90 frames, that's where the benefit of the 3080 really lies. Previously, I was running on low settings across the board to maintain that 90 FPS, not only for my well-being to stop me from getting motion sick, but also for the quality of footage that you guys are watching as well. Nobody enjoys stutters or low frames, especially when you're used to such high quality video being so readily available these days. It's an instant turn-off if it does start stuttering, and as a content creator, I just can't risk that. I mean, not only is it unenjoyable for you, it's just unprofessional from me. And up until now, that's meant, like I said, low detail settings and reduced resolutions just to make sure I get those stable frames. Most people who are here purely for the racing can tend to look past a little bit of a lower fidelity, but let's be honest, if you have the option, it's always nice to have a little bit of extra eye candy in the video. And that's actually something else I've noticed, just on a side note. The encoding for recording and streaming is now significantly less of an impact on the card. I've always been using the HVENC new encoder in Streamlabs for my videos and streams, but now, with the 3080, there's hardly any difference in performance whether I'm recording or not recording. That said, there always seems to be a big difference between running offline or running against the AI, and then when you go and jump on the multiplayer servers, it just seems to be a drop in performance for some reason. I've never figured it out, but if you guys happen to know why, then please do let me know in the comments below. It's always puzzled me. And it was always particularly noticeable in rFactor 2, often running fine throughout all of the VEC practice server sessions, but then tanking the performance as soon as I went on the actual race server itself. It's quite apparent in RaceRoom as well. Performance always seems to drop off whenever I go online compared to running offline, even with the same number of cars and settings on track. So yeah, it's not all roses still. Even with the 3080, I still find myself having to turn down a few settings just to give me that safety, because when you're live, it's already too late. You know, you can't do anything about the stuttering when you're in the VR headset in the middle of a race. You can't just pause it, change your settings and carry on. Well, I mean, to be fair actually, you can do that in ACC. Shout out to ACC for that. Probably the only good thing about the VR implementation in that title actually. But that brings me on to the next section of this video, where I go through each of the sims that I use and the effect that this new graphics card's had. RaceRoom is a sim that's got one hand tied behind its back when it comes to graphics, since it's still running on the old DirectX 9 engine. It's massively CPU dependent, especially on single core speed, since it can only utilise one core at a time. Often the CPU will bottleneck with the graphics card just idling, so the new 3080 doesn't actually help out that much or make it look that much nicer. With the extra headroom, I can increase the super sampling and create a sharper image, but the in-game settings for VR is still a compromise. Getting a 3080 doesn't solve anything sadly, but even if it did, RaceRoom just doesn't keep up with newer titles in terms of the visuals, unfortunately. I mean, I love it for everything else, but it's definitely not my first choice if I want to go and capture some jaw-dropping visuals. In pancake mode, I can max everything out, but then again, I could still do that on my old 1080 with no issues. But if you're running in VR, you still have to keep the shadows turned down, or even off completely in most cases, to maintain that smooth frame rate. If you're wanting to increase your performance in RaceRoom, then it's not a case of getting a new graphics card, it's a case of getting the best single core CPU speed you can find, and then overclocking the hell out of it. iRacing was probably one of the most optimized VR titles on my old card to begin with, so I was expecting good things on the 3080, and yeah, I wasn't disappointed. I can turn shadows on now, increase the level of details on the track and other cars without any noticeable drop in performance, and it looks great. Nice and crisp without being too pixely. Out of everything I run, I'd probably say that iRacing looks the clearest, the sharpest, you know? And it just runs so smooth. No stutters or anything, even when I'm surrounded by a field of other cars. Now, I know this is all subjective, but I feel like iRacing is the one that makes the most out of the extra power that's available from this new 3080 card. The biggest increase I've noticed is on pancake mode though, since I can absolutely max out everything when I'm recording my replays, especially motion blur. This just adds the icing on top, which takes the footage to the next level and just makes it look even smoother. One particular combo I had trouble with on my old 1080 card was Charlotte Roval at sunset. This, in particular, just lagged out my recordings so much. No problems now though, even in these changeable light conditions which prove so taxing. But this might all be a waste because I'm just not particularly that motivated to run in iRacing at the moment. I'm not sure whether it's the whole toxicity thing that's burned me out, but iRacing just seems to be so much more stressful and so much more frustrating than any other sim. But that's just something completely unrelated to graphics, so before I get caught up on that, let's move on.
I'm so sorry, mate. I had no contact here.
I think the results here for ACC won't be unexpected to anybody. It still looks and feels terrible in VR. I mean, in its own right, it's probably not bad, but compared to everything else out there, it's just so poorly optimized. Yeah, sure, I can turn the settings up quite a lot now with the 3080, and I'm not running reduced pixel density or having to turn off shadows and mirrors completely, which was a massive immersion breaker on the previous card, by the way. But even with the details turned up to what's actually quite a reasonable level, something just looks off. I don't know what exactly. It's incredibly hard to describe. Maybe the clarity of the image? If you're on ACC in VR, you have to increase the sharpness to pretty much the maximum to get a usable image, but even then it's almost like there's a smudge over the whole picture. You still get random stutters and drops too, which seem completely unrelated to what's going on in the actual session. For my testing, I was running in the rain with a large grid at Bathurst, really to push it to the max, and it'd run fine, but then it wouldn't, and then it would again. It just had really inconsistent performance, which unfortunately was the same in pancake mode too. ACC is one of the few titles where I couldn't run maximum settings and had to start making compromises even on my single monitor, which kind of makes sense with it being one of the most recent sims out there, but still, you get the feeling that it's just not very well optimized at all, whether you're running in VR or not. I'm not even going to try and make a logical comparison on rFactor 2. This title has frustrated me beyond belief for many years and just has a mind of its own when it comes to whether it wants to behave or not. I could turn everything up to the max and it would run beautifully, and then one day something would just break for no discernible reason and I'm back at square one. Honestly, over the last few years, I've spent so many hours just configuring rFactor 2 and problem solving. Also, the lack of a comparison and footage has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I may have uninstalled rFactor 2 immediately after my final VEC race and failed attempt at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Nothing to do with that at all. Wow, just wow. This is hands down by far the best sim racing title that I've ever experienced in VR. Assetto Corsa just looks so crisp, even without ridiculous amounts of super sampling. I can turn the settings to pretty much maximum and the performance is so smooth inside the headset and looks great on recorded footage too. It just... I was absolutely blown away when I tried this. Yeah, I know I'm using Sol and CSP to make it look pretty, but the optimization is very well done. For example, things like shadow detail and shadow resolution can be bumped up pretty much to the maximum, so you can get all these details on the track and inside the cockpit, which just add to the immersion so much. And the lighting around the various times of day really works well too. Even running a large field of cars at the Nordschleife didn't bother the 3080. It just lapped it up like it was nothing, and I'm not gonna lie, I actually recorded so much more footage for this section of the video than I actually needed to because I just didn't want to stop driving, and that's the first time that's happened in a long time. Usually I just go and record my clips and then jump straight back into the editing software, but not with this. I was absolutely engrossed. And pancake footage looks great as well, and although I know AC is a little dated, the modding community just keeps on breathing new life into it and keeping it just as relevant as any of the other new sim racing titles out there. Even on my old 1080 card, AC would run pretty well, so it just goes to show that it's pretty well optimized in terms of graphics. But the ability to really push the limits and turn everything up to the max, even in VR, with the 3080 is probably one of the most visually stunning, compromise-free sim racing experiences you're gonna get. It's a bit of a mixed result with this one because, on one hand, previously on my 1080 I couldn't even run VR in the first place because the stutters were just too bad, even with everything turned down to the absolute minimum. But running in pancake mode, I could nearly max everything out, Dirt Rally 2.0 clearly isn't optimized poorly in terms of overall graphical performance, not in the same way that ACC is. It just has very poorly implemented VR support. This annoys me so much because the original Dirt Rally was an amazing VR experience, which was taken away for 2.0, but due to popular demand, kind of half-heartedly, it was patched back in, but they didn't do a very good job of it. As a result, I kind of gave up on Dirt Rally 2.0 because, like I said at the start of the video, I'm mostly a VR guy and I just don't get the same satisfaction or immersion through a monitor, and I believe that you as the viewer can pick up on that as well. At the end of the day, in my opinion, being entertaining and engaging is much more important than having a lifeless video that looks nice. That said, with the new 3080 card, I now have the ability to run in VR stutter-free, and actually not run at minimum settings either, although it doesn't look particularly pretty. It's passable though, and could easily be fixed with an increase in the super sampling to get a sharper image, but then this starts to introduce those stutters again and it's back to square one. However, just being able to run Dirt Rally 2.0 in VR is a game changer for me, as the ability to look into the corners and kind of feel your way around the stages just makes the driving so much more natural. To me, pancake rally driving feels a lot like guesswork most of the time, but to be fair, the footage does look stunning as always though, and just highlights the fact that the developers decided to focus on that. It really does feel like VR is just an afterthought to them. Now, something that would be amazing to get around this would be the ability to save replays. So, you know, you could do your run in VR with the invaluable spatial awareness and extra immersion that you get, but then you could just go and load up your replay in pancake mode and record it back on the optimized visuals. But sadly, that most basic feature of saving a replay isn't available. Come on, Codemasters, sort it out. Now, I know there's other sim racing titles out there, but they either don't support VR, such as the Codemasters F1 series, BeamNG, and, well, officially, Automobilista 1, or I don't use them often enough to make a meaningful comparison between my old 1080 and my new 3080. Things like Euro Truck Simulator, Project Cars, and Automobilista 2. I mean, I have spent time in them, but not recently, so it'd kind of be pointless. What this new 3080 has done for me though is give me so much more of a buffer to be able to play with. It might not be a massive boost on the face of things in terms of graphical fidelity, but it really has made the encoding and the streaming and the recording so much more seamless. I just don't have to run things on the limit of performance anymore and worry about frame drops and screen freezes. And ultimately, it just gives me that extra peace of mind that I can just go racing and I don't have to worry about the quality of video that you guys are seeing on the screen. I just know it's going to be smooth and just a little bit crisper now as well. I know I've rambled on for a bit now, but I really do hope this gives you guys an idea of what it's like to upgrade to a 3080 if you're thinking about it, especially if you sim race in VR. Like I said a few times, this isn't going to be some kind of magic bullet that'll fix all your frame rate problems. You're still going to have to make a few compromises if you're using a headset or maybe triples. That said, single monitor 4K racing shouldn't be an issue with max settings across the board, but that's not really my kind of thing, so I'm probably not the most reliable source of information when it comes to pancake sim racing. Anyway, if you found it useful, don't forget to leave the video a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Are there any obvious tricks that I've missed in extracting performance out of this new card? Or just, is there anything particular you want to see me record on the channel? Just let me know. And if you do want to see the new card in action, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and press that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. But until then, you look after yourselves guys, and I'll see you all again real soon. Bye bye.